ध्यायामो धवलावकुण्ठनवते तेजोमयीं नैष्टिकीं स्निग्धापाङ्गविलोकिनीं भगवतीं मन्दस्मितश्रीमुखीं वात्सल्यामृतवर्षिणीं सुमधुरं सङ्कीर्तनालापिनीं श्यामाङ्गीं मधुसिक्तसूक्तिम् अमृतानन्दात्मिकाम् ईश्वरीम् शुक्लां वरदरं विष्णु शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये सरस्वती नमस्तुभ्यं वरदे ज्ञानरूपिणे विद्यारम्भं करिष्यामि सिद्धिर्भवतु मे सदा गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरा गुरुः साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः. Om Amriteshware Namaha. Welcome to Amrita Chintanam. Today we have the next talk on the theme I Love India. Today Brahmacharini Amrita Chaitanya will be talking about India's gift to the world, the spirit of Yajna. Brahmacharini Amrita Chaitanya met Amma in 1997 in Paris. She visited the ashram several times before joining in 2004.
Om Amriteshware Namaha. I bow down before our most beloved Amma and all of Amma's children. From when I was a small child, I always had a great love for India. I was kind of obsessed with India. And there wasn't a clear reason for that. Basically, when in her youth, my mother had come to visit India. And she used to tell me about her trip. And I just had an obsession. I just loved India. So my parents, for one of my birthdays, they bought me a big photo book of India. And I would just go over and over the pages of the book so many times. Even today, I remember very clearly the photos in the book. Just fascinated with every aspect, anything to do with India. If you ask me why I love India so much, I don't really know what to say, because it's not something that can be fully comprehended intellectually. It's more of a feeling. But if you really press me and push me and tell me I have to come up with some reason of why I love India, I think this is what I'd say. I'd say India teaches us or gives us the opportunity to be able to spiritualize every aspect of our life. And I really feel that's India's gift to the rest of the world. And I do feel to this day, this is what the strongest element that makes me love India and attracts me to India. Of course, it doesn't mean that in India, everything is spiritual, all the people are fully into spirituality all the time. That's not what I mean. But I feel that India has that wealth. It has the tools, it can give us the guidance of what to do to spiritualize our life. And more than just the tools, of course, it has the teachers. Because India's soil, as we know, is blessed by the touch of the feet of countless acharyas, countless gurus. Because the Guru Parampara stretches back to time immemorial. So this is what we're going to talk about a little bit today. And this, if we look from the scriptures side of things, this spiritualizing of India, it's given a term, and that is to work or to live in the spirit of Yajna, of sacrifice. So when you talk about Yajna, what comes to mind is a ritual we must have seen it. It happens a lot here in Amma's ashram. If there's a Homa Kundam, and it's a very complex ritual with many steps. And each of the steps are very full of meaning. There's a high or very deep symbolism to each of the steps, each of the ingredients used. There's the fire within the Homa Kundam and the items that are offered into the fire. And basically, that's one subject, all the deeper meaning to every step of the ritual. But it's not limited to that. When we talk about living with the spirit of Yajna, it extends far beyond that. And basically, it goes to encompass every aspect of our life. So if we look at the Yajna, first and foremost, it's a law, it's a universal law, like a cosmic law. If we look in the Shastras, in the Vedas, it tells a story, like the story of creation is said as a major, a universal, or the primordial Yajna. And it was that Yajna of the divine being, the supreme being, sacrificing himself to become the universe. And if we look at there's the Purusha Suktam, which is an ancient hymn from the Vedas, and that describes this process of the divine being transforming, the infinite divine being transforming to become this finite world, the material world. And it's like that this eternal cycle of creation is initiated. So like this, we see that this spirit of Yajna is basically the source of all creation. This is the foundation of the creation. And it's at the heart, this Yajna is at the heart of all creative forces. And that first Yajna of the Supreme Being is called Sarvahuta, and it's the offering of Sarva, of all. And so in this, there's a deep message of love, because it's the Supreme Being himself who consumes himself in the fire of the sacrifice, and that is in order to create this universe. So like this, we see from the scriptures that the original Yajna becomes the very law, the law of life. So basically, this whole universe, the dynamic of this universe, also, the Yajna is the origin of this universe, but this universe's dynamic is that of a perpetual, a constant Yajna, or sacrifice. And the way we should understand this is that in creation, every living entity consumes other forms of life for that to survive, to live. So it's a whole cycle of giving and taking, and that life transforms like that. It's a transformation of life into life, and that's the very nature of existence. So all beings perform a kind of within this cycle, within this Yajna. Amma always tells us, she says, every being in creation is in a situation of mutual cooperation. Every element, whether it's the animals, fish, insects, trees, plants, everything. And when every being in creation, Amma says, helps us. And it's in ways that are beyond what we can imagine. There's also very subtle ways in which the universe, each being, each element, each entity in the universe helps us. I'd like to tell you a story. And this story is actually an incident that happened. And it was my friend. I have a friend called Amrita Shri. She's a cardiologist. She's Amma's devotee. And she's a cardiologist. At the moment, she's working in a hospital in France. She often comes here to the ashram. And the last time she came, she told me of an incident that had happened. And that's what I'd like to share with you. Amrita, she was telling me how she felt so grateful to be able to work in an environment, the hospital, in which everyone, she meant like both the colleagues, but even also the patients she's treating, are able to forget their own problems and they strive and even live to help others. So this particular incident, happened a few years ago. She was on a shift in the hospital that was 24 hours. So I think it was around 2 a.m. She went to lie down for a little bit, for some time. She went to sleep. But then she was woken up by a phone call at 3 a.m. And it was her colleagues from the ICU who were calling her. And the reason they called her was they wanted her to make an assessment on the state of a patient's heart, to see if it was healthy enough to be donated for another patient. So Amritashri got up, she went to the ICU, she went close to the bed of the patient in question, and she was quite shocked to see that it was a very young patient. It was a young woman, maybe in her 30s. And she looked from the notes and saw that there was no previous medical history also. She had been a healthy woman. So Amritashri, she inquired to find out what had happened. It turned out that the lady that night, she was walking, she by mistake walked on a kind of glass ceiling that fell and she fell through, it broke. And so it means she fell down from 4 floors. And she immediately, from the impact from the fall, she had irreversible brain damage already by the time the ambulance came. So Amritashri performed the assessment on that woman's heart. And then when she came out of the ICU, the lady's family was there, waiting to see the doctor, waiting to see Amritashri. We can't imagine the pain they must have been in, because from one moment to the next, from one day to the next, they just lost their daughter. We can't even start imagining their pain. So they were crying. And Amritashri told me she expected them to ask her if there was any possible glimmer of hope, that there could be a new assessment on the state of their daughter, like just some hope that she could be brought back to life. But what they asked her was actually something very different. They said, "Doctor, how is the heart? Will this heart be able to be used to save someone else's life? No one can give us our daughter back, but at least if through her loss another life can be saved, we'll be able to get some solace from that." Just think, these people were in the most painful situation we can imagine. And still they had that selflessness, they had that nobility to be, even in those moments of intense pain, to be able to think about helping others. Amritashri, when she told me this incident, she also quoted Amma's words, "The beauty of selfless acts should never disappear from the face of the earth." This is a very touching story, but beyond being a touching story, it's also an example of Yajna, because it's an incident when human beings acted in a spirit of selflessness. They went beyond their own selfish desires and limitations for the sake of something higher, something noble. But as we all know, even though there are many instances of such noble actions, we human beings, unfortunately, don't always act in that kind of way. So while the rest of creation is spontaneously in this cycle of mutual cooperation, of mutual helping each other, for us, it's not always like that. We're like the dissonant element, because we have this freedom. And on one side, the freedom and that potential we have to search, to inquire, and also to go within ourselves and realize the highest truths of the universe. But we can also use that freedom in a negative way, to not play our part in this cycle of creation. So for human beings, it has to be spelled out. We have to be told, do your part. So here I'm going to tell, there's a shloka from the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita which mentions this. The shloka goes, Saha yajnaha praja srishtva purovacha prajapatihi. So prajapatihi, which means the creator, having created mankind together with the yajna, he says, now I give you the yajna. Anena prasavishyadhvam esha vaha astu ishtakamadhuk. So he's saying, I give you this, he's speaking to humankind, I give you this yajna. May this yajna be the kamadhuk for you. Kamadhuk is the mythological cow which yields all desires. So this shows, the fact that this word is used in the shloka, it really shows that for human beings, no achievement is impossible if we act in that right way, in the right spirit, in the spirit of yajna, in this spirit of cooperation, where we're willing, we need to be ready to sacrifice our selfish goals and interests for the sake of a higher, nobler good, a higher goal. That's what yajna is for human beings. We can make, it's up to us, it's up to human beings whether we make a hell or a heaven on earth. And if we ask, okay, what's the way forward to make a heaven, to create a heaven? Amma always tells us that's through giving. Amma always tells us, keep focusing, think on what you can give. But through giving, it's not only the recipient of the benefactor, the person we're giving to who's benefited. Because through the act of giving, we ourselves are uplifted. Our lives are fulfilled. We thrive through giving. Because when we look at again, these shlokas in the Gita, this part about yajna, there's very much this idea of a cycle. And that as human beings, it's not like there's nature and then human beings. We're very much part of this cycle. And every single being, every single creature, every single plant, everything has an integral part in this cycle. So this is idea of mutual cooperation and of being part of nature. And these ideas are actually fundamental to the philosophy of deep ecology, which is now becoming very accepted in the modern world. But it's kind of fascinating and inspiring to think the same ideas behind this philosophy of deep ecology are found in the Vedas, these texts that were written thousands of years ago. And again, in the same section, in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna talks about this cycle, particularly in 1 or 2 verses. I'll read one verse to you. Krishna says, Annat bhavanti bhutani, which means, I'll go line by little, section by section. Annat bhavanti bhutani means that the creatures or beings come from food. So basically, it's meaning from food, all beings are sustained. Then the next section, next part of the shloka goes, Parjanyat anna sambhavaha, which means from rain, food is produced. Basically, that food comes from nature and that rain is needed for the crops to grow. The next part is Yajnat bhavati parjanyaha. The rain comes from yajna. And then it goes on, Yajnaha karma samudbhavaha, which means karma or action. Yajna is born from karma or action. So we can understand easily the beginning part, which is part of the cycle of nature, of the crops coming from nature, which need rain. But that we should understand also the deeper meaning behind the part talking about yajna. And the reason is, in the ancient times, in the yajnas, people would worship the Vedic devas. But actually those devas were in charge of different functions in nature. They were the different powers of nature. So the idea behind this shloka is basically worship them, these forces in nature, and they will sustain you. Or we can say in modern terms, we can also interpret it as sustain nature, and nature will sustain you. So we're all connected like this through this cycle. And for us human beings, basically, either we need to play our part or we'll suffer, and nature will suffer along with us because we're in a part of nature. So we don't need to be told, human beings don't need to be told that you've got to take and receive, because that we just do naturally and we need it for our survival. So when talking about Yajna, the aspect that Bhagavan reminds us of is that we need to play our part in the sense of we need to give. So that means we need to give both to fellow human beings, but also to the broader nature that we're part of. And if we don't give, we're the ones who are going to lose out. I'd like to share a little story with you. Basically, this happened many years ago when I was a small child. We had some distant relatives who lived in a different country and who were really rich, like really rich. And so we were invited, like all our big family, like my family and our cousins and aunts and uncles, all our kind of joint family, large family, was invited to go and stay for a few days at the house of these distant relatives. And when I say house, it wasn't a house. Basically, it was a mansion. So as kids, we were really excited to go and spend a few days with them because they had a swimming pool, a tennis court, and it was this huge kind of castle kind of house to play around in. So we were really excited. At the same time, so we went there, but all our parents, so it was basically, I was playing with my cousins, and then all the parents of my cousins, they were all quite nervous because they thought, oh my God, this is such a rich house, and there's so much antique, expensive furniture around. What if the kids break something? So for the times of unsupervised playing, the adults would send us kids to the attic in the top of one of the parts of the building, because there was only some old things, like there wasn't anything of much value. So they thought that's a safe place where we won't be able to cause any damage. I mean, so they thought, because we did manage to create some damage in that. We were playing cards, and one of my little cousins, she sat on an edge of a small marble table, and the corner of the table just cracked. So we got a bit nervous, and as kids we went and told our parents, and then they got really scared. Not scared, but none of them wanted to be the one to go and tell the owner of the house that we had damaged something. They were all too scared. So finally, my mother took up the job that no one else wanted to do. She went to the master of the house and told them that this little crack, I think it might have been broken off, but it was a small table, the little corner broke off. And we were shocked to see the reaction of the owners of the house, because they were really upset. They were distressed about this little table, because we thought, anyway, it's not going to be much of a big deal, because it's a small and not very valuable item, just left up with some other junk in the attic. But just seeing their reaction over this little table, we were just all shocked. It became a big source of tension, and they were very distressed about it. And basically, this is just how the mind works at the same time, because when we focus too much on me and mine and on our possessions, objects, then we easily get overly attached, and we identify with external objects. When I think back, though, I just kind of feel compassion for them, because they were so focused on their possessions and their wealth that they were basically missing out on the real wealth of life. That wealth of sharing, of giving, of compassion. So that's one story. Now let me just tell you another story, because it's nice to compare the two. This happened many years later. I have a younger brother, and he volunteered to go and teach refugees in a refugee camp. He was teaching the kids English. So he had done that volunteering for a few weeks, and it was time for him to come back home. And the kids in the class, basically the kids he was teaching were kids who had lost their home. They had to flee their country. Many of them had lost a few family members or been separated from them. They were really in a challenging time of their life. But the last day of school, the last day of class before my brother went back, when he entered the classroom, he was shocked because the whole classroom was decorated with balloons and goodbye cards that the kids had drawn. And there was a whole feast on the table. And all the kids were standing there expectantly looking at him, smiling from ear to ear to see what his reaction was going to be. My brother, seeing all that, he just started crying because, as he told me after, he said, look, these kids are kids who've been robbed of a childhood. They've had to flee their country. They've lost everything. They don't even have a country to call their own. And still, look at the happiness with which they organized this goodbye party for me. Seeing my brother with tears in his eyes, the kids came to him and said, "Sir, don't cry, don't cry." And they just kept adding food on his plate for him to eat. So that, of course, made him just cry even more. Amongst all of this, a little child, probably a 9-year-old child, approached my brother and he said, "Sir, will you please," and he gave my brother a piece of cake. And he said, "Sir, will you please see that girl standing over there?" He showed her about a 12-year-old girl. He said, "She somehow managed to bake this cake and she's not eating anything herself. If you give it to her, she'll eat something. Please, sir, just give her this piece of cake." My brother was just in disbelief, seeing the consideration and care that this little 9-year-old had. How thoughtful he was at such a young age. Just see these two incidents between my relatives and then this kid at the refugee camp. Just see the contrast. My relatives were amongst the richest of people, but at the same time, they were poor in a way because they were lacking that real wealth in life. Whereas these kids, the refugee kids, they were amongst the poorest in society. They had nothing. Yet, in a way, they were rich. I feel we can say they were rich because they had these values, the most invaluable of riches, which is these human values which make a foundation for a meaningful life. These are the values that hold life together. In that same selection of shlokas, Lord Krishna says, "Evam pravartitam chakram na anuvartayati iha yaha aghayuhu indriya ramaha mogham partha sajivati." Which means he who doesn't follow the wheel, this cycle that's revolving in this way, his life is a worthless one. He's just rejoicing in his senses and he lives in vain. Oh, son of Kunti, he's talking to Arjuna. So when we focus only on I and me and mine, and we don't have any consideration about giving to others, be they our fellow human beings or nature, we're not playing our part in this cycle. And basically, we don't even need to think about future births, what we'll have to suffer, but we suffer in this life. Because if you even look at the example, we just saw my distant relatives. Think of the distress that small table caused them. So if we think of that, we can only imagine how much anxiety and worry, basically unhappiness they must have had thinking of all the other possessions and that worry about being able to keep everything and that nothing would get lost or damaged. They were always in a state of worry, really. So when you live a life like that, it's kind of a shrunken life. And not only you're missing out on the high spiritual goal of human birth, but even on a more ordinary level, you're missing out on that a good, meaningful life. So to avoid such a scenario, what do we need to do? Our scriptures, it's not just, it may seem a bit vague saying transform all your life into a yajna, but our scriptures give us a kind of clear recommendation of saying follow the 5 mahayajnas. This is a devout Hindu would perform these, is expected to perform these every day. So the first one is the Brahma Yajna. And that's basically devoting some time in the day to a little bit of study, or it can be teaching, of the spiritual principles, of the Shastras. Like what we're doing now. You're giving me an opportunity for a little Brahma Yajna, and if you're listening to this, it's also your Brahma Yajna right now. Just a small amount of our time in our day should be spent for this. The second one is what was called Deva Yajna. So in the ancient times, that would mean to worship the Vedic Devas. Of course, today that's not, but we don't do that. It's more the Devas, the gods from the Puranas, etc., that we worship. So translated into today, it would mean to spend a little part of your day in worship of your own kind of, to your liking, basically. It can be going to the temple, it can be sitting in the little prayer corner in your room, in your house, just spending a few moments to turn inwards. The third one is Pitra Yajna, and that's to honor our ancestors. Basically, to have a feeling of gratitude towards our parents and also the past generations. And that comes with this recognition that we're not just an isolated individual, like we're not just a product from only our efforts, but we have the blessings of countless previous generations also. See, just a side point with these Mahayajnas, the Pancha Mahayajnas, we shouldn't see these as just a duty that we need to perform. Because, okay, on one side it may be that, but the point is if we do these, we're the first ones to benefit. Because even modern psychology has shown how having feelings of gratitude can enhance our happiness and our feeling of having a meaningful life. Having those thoughts, remembering the people we should be grateful towards, all that makes us happier. It helps to remove our negative, sometimes when our mind goes down, just remembering and having a bit of gratitude is enough to just lift our mood. There's the next yajna is Manushya Yajna, and that means to help give to our fellow beings. Just to contribute in some way to the welfare of others. I'd like to tell you a story here, and because this is particularly relevant today, seeing as it's very common now, more and more people volunteer to help others, which comes under Manushya Yajna. I have a friend, her name is Sarayu. She's a resident at the ashram. So when she was young, when she was a kid and as an adolescent, she was very athletic. Like she loved sports, and she's really tall. So she was really particularly good at basketball. And so she went through her education, and when she graduated from university, after that, she went on a trip with her friends. And basically, they had a really serious car accident in which the car flipped over 3 times. And Sarayu was stuck inside the car, which in her words, she said the car was turned into a chapati. Her spine was broken in several parts, and also several other bones were broken. So she was basically semi-paralyzed. She had to go in for a surgery, which was going to last like 7 hours. It lasted 7 hours. Basically, at this point, her neck is held together with 2 meters of titanium wire, and also some bone from the hip as well. So actually, the surgery was a success. But then after that came 16 months of rehabilitation. And she was basically in a full body cast for 24 hours a day. So her whole world had turned upside down in one moment, basically. Because all her life, seeing as she had been an athlete, she was just used to pushing her body to make her body do what she wanted it to do. And suddenly, now she couldn't even get up from a chair without the help of someone. She felt betrayed by her body. And also, she felt cut off from everyone else around. Like her friends came to visit her, but she couldn't look them in the eye. No, they couldn't look at her in the eye. They just felt so bad. And even though her parents were with her and were full of love for her, she could sense their helplessness because she was alone in her pain. They couldn't do anything to help that. So she was asking herself questions about life, but mainly also really wallowing in feelings of depression and self-pity. wondering what she was going to do with the rest of her life. But one day, she got a phone call, and it was from the sports trainer from the school that she went to. And she was asked if she could coach the girls' basketball team. At the beginning, Sarayu thought that the coach was joking, the trainer from the school, that she was joking. So I can't even move my head from one side to the other. How can I possibly coach a basketball team? But the trainer was adamant that Sarayu came. So she agreed, and she was driven to school, and they sat her next to the basketball court. She couldn't herself go and show any of the moves. But the girls, it was a girls' team, they'd come and gather around her, and she'd give them guidance and tell them what they should do. And she started doing this, and as she did it, her mood was completely lifted, because these girls had such enthusiasm that youthfulness, that enthusiasm brought a ray of hope into Sarayu's life. And it gave her, going and training them, gave her a reason to wake up in the morning. Because she realized she had a gift to share. And she even said she felt so grateful for the opportunity, because it was so much meaningful for her that she could offer this gift. And it was even more meaningful than if she herself had been able to play basketball. So this was a huge lesson for Sarayu, but it really shows us also how this Manushya Yajna, or doing something for the welfare of our fellow beings, how it benefits us first and foremost. It basically increases our capabilities, and it makes us feel more confident, more assertive, and more successful. Then there's the last of the 5, is the Bhuta Yajna. That means doing something for the greater natural world around us. So that can be in the form of just a small small gesture, like feeding the birds, or growing a plant and giving water to the plant, anything like that. But also making the choices that we make in our day-to-day life, while considering the effects on the natural world around us as well. But when we do this, we're greatly benefited, because nature is a part of us. So when we lose our connection to nature, we lose a connection to ourselves. And when this is re-established, again, we ourselves are the first ones to be benefited. Amma often tells, just recently, someone who's working in the garden here in the ashram told me that when they went to Amma for advice, the bit of advice that Amma gave the most often was, love the plants, talk to the plants, kiss the plants. Not only they will benefit from that vibration of love, but we will also, will benefit from that vibration too. So these 5 Mahayajnas, when we do these, as we said, they benefit at many different levels. As we saw, for society at large, the large cycle that we're part of benefits. But also at an individual level, we have a more meaningful life, a happier life, a good life, and a sustainable life. But it goes beyond that too. Basically, it also, to work and perform our actions in the spirit of yajna is the way for us, it shows us the way towards attaining the highest state that a human being can attain. Because it's not only about doing some good actions, but it's broader than that. It's about applying this spirit of yajna to every single action of our day, from the smallest menial tasks like brushing our teeth, driving to work, drinking a cup of coffee. And the easiest way for us as Amma's children to understand this is through Amma's words. And this is what Amma says. She says there's 2 things that you need to do. One is try to perform every action with the attitude of puja manobhava, seeing it as a worship of the divine. And also, everything that comes your way, all the results from your actions, you should try to accept them with prasada buddhi, or the attitude that this is prasad from the divine. Amma says the whole of Vedanta is contained in these 2. And if we ask, why is it so important? Does it contain such a secret? It's because if we do this, it's the way it shows us how to become free. Lord Krishna, again in the same 3rd chapter, says, Yatnyarthat karmano anyatra, lokoyam karma bandhanaha, which means that the world is bound by actions that other than those performed for the sake of yajna, for the sake of sacrifice. So we're bound by actions. And he goes on to say, tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. Therefore, son of Kunti, Arjuna, perform action for the sake of yajna alone, free from all attachment. He's saying the same thing as Amma, having that puja manobhavam in our actions. And the reason why is because if in our actions, this puja manobhavam, this spirit of yajna, makes us free from our bondage. Because if we think about it, even though we don't realize it, the actions we perform usually bind us. For example, if we imagine we eat a chocolate, that's an action. That's going to leave an impression within us, a samskara that creates within our being, it creates a samskara. From that, a vasana or tendency is produced. And from that vasana, a thought or a desire to eat a chocolate will be produced. So it's a cycle that reinforces itself. And that means, in the end of the day, that was just a simplification, but it happens in a more complex way with all of our actions. So the end result is that we're bound. The reason why we're bound is when these actions come from ego and selfishness. So through this bondage that we ourselves create, we end up being conditioned. So our reactions, we don't see life as it is. And our reactions, they come from a space of being controlled by our vasanas. It's not a spontaneous reaction. So we need to try to become free. And Amma and Krishna are giving us the secret to become free from this cycle of bondage from actions. I'm going to give you just a small example of how we can understand this. A few days ago, I was walking in the ashram and I saw my friend coming from the opposite direction. She was walking towards me. And with her was a young woman, a visitor to the ashram. I hadn't seen my friend in a long time. So when we were about to cross each other, we smiled at each other and said Namah Shivaya. I was about to say, how are you? I haven't seen you in so long. But just before I said that sentence, the young lady was with her. She turned to her and said something to her. So it meant that their conversation carried on and they carried on walking. So I walked on too, and actually I was fine. I was fine not to stop and talk because I was actually in a hurry. But my ego was pricked. I thought of that young woman. I thought, she's so impolite. Like, she's younger than me. She could have at least given me some respect. She just cut me off before I was going to say anything. Thinking, where's the respect? And then I was thinking, this is what my mind was going on saying. I thought, where's the respect? And anyway, I've helped her so many times. She's come to me asking for advice. I've listened to her. I've given her advice. So can't she at least acknowledge my presence? And then I thought, I'm going to remember this next time she comes and asks me for help. Luckily, these absurd thoughts only lasted for about 10 seconds because then I caught myself. I realized how ridiculous I was being because I was the one at fault. The two of them were having a conversation. And who was I? Was I that important that they had to stop to acknowledge my presence? I laughed when I realized how absurd my reaction had been. And I realized that actually, rather than feeling resentment toward this young woman, I should feel grateful towards her. Because in that situation, she had acted like a mirror for me to see my ego, my ugly ego raising its head. So like this, when we're able to break free from the selfishness and ego that we create around us through our actions, we're able to respond in a more mature way, in a way that's constructive in the world, that we can grow from. So there's other benefits from acting with puja manobhavam, because we end up, just like Adama says, we only give to God the best that we can find. So in that same way, when we act in our actions, we're going to give the best of ourselves in those actions. So we'll become more efficient and more successful. And also, then what we receive back we'll receive as prasad. And Lord Krishna says that also. He says, Yajna shishta shina santaha mutyante sarvakilbishehi. The righteous, the ones who eat, who receive the remnants of the sacrifice, the prasad, they are freed from all impurities. There's another story I'd like to share with you. This last story before we end. This is the story of a friend of mine, Shivesh. I should say a brother of mine, younger brother. He lives in the US, his whole family are devotees. And now he's an adult, but when he was a kid, he'd spend his school vacation period touring with Amma, following Amma on her tour of the US. So when he was about 9 years old, there were many kids on tour at that time. They had a whole group of friends. But when he was about 9 years old, it was the last stop on the tour, which was Toronto. And then there was one morning that was free, didn't have any program. So some of the kids and like the adolescents, they got together as a group and they wanted to go and watch a movie. So they went to see Amma. During the darshan, they went to ask Amma for permission to go out and see the movie the next day. So Amma gave her permission. Then, but Shivesh had missed the boat. He wasn't with the group when they went to ask Amma. So he decided to go and ask Amma by himself. So the darshan was going on. Shivesh went up to the side next to Amma's chair. Amma looked at him and gave him a nod in his direction, said, "Son, what is it?" So he told Amma, he said, "Amma, can I go with the others to go see the movie?" Amma smiled at him and then Amma said, "Yes, son, you can go and see the movie. But when you're sitting there watching the movie, imagine that Amma is sitting in the seat right next to you. Imagine that she's also enjoying watching the movie with you. Imagine that the two of you are eating popcorn there together." I'm not telling you the story to tell you to go to watch movies and eat popcorn. But if you just think of these words, these simple words of Amma, this simple instruction that Amma gave to a 9-year-old, this contains the secret of working in the spirit of Yajna. Because it shows how if we connect every one of our actions, whatever they may be, to the divine, for us it means connecting that to Amma, that action becomes a Yajna. In his commentary to the Bhagavad Gita, this 3rd chapter, Shankaracharya says, he quotes an Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, he says, "Yajno vai Vishnuhu," and then goes to say, "Yajna Ishvaraha," which means the Yajna is Ishvara. There's no difference. And what is Ishvara? Ishvara is compassion, tolerance, forgiveness, patience, serenity, humility, courage, light, and truth. It's basically all our highest values. And Amma represents all these highest, most noble values. So every action that we do that's connected to her is like an action dedicated at the altar of that which we hold to be most noble. And such actions will lead us to that highest state of being completely free. So let us pray that all of us, let's pray for Amma's grace, for all of us to be able to perform good actions in that spirit, in that remembrance that we are part of a much bigger cycle. And also that every single one of our actions, we may, through applying the puja manobhavam and prasada buddhi, we may transform into worship of the divine, and that our lives may be filled with love and light. Om Amriteshwari Namaha.
Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. 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 लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम्